Chapter 1. 4 Sisters. "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents," said Jo crossly.
"It's so awful to be poor," agreed Meg, looking at her old dress. "It's not right for some girls to have pretty things and others to have nothing at all," said little Amy. "We've got Father and Mother and each other," said Beth gently. The 4 young faces round the fire cheered up as they thought of this, but then Jo said sadly, "We haven't got Father, and we won't have him for a long time." She didn't say, perhaps never, but each silently thought it, remembering that he was away at the war in the South. Then Meg said, "Mother says we shouldn't spend money on presents when our men are fighting a war."
"We can't expect anything from Mother or each other," said Jo. "But we only have $1 each, and that won't help the army much. Let's each buy ourselves what we want and have a little fun. We work hard to earn it." "I do, teaching those awful children," said Meg. "What about me?" said Jo. "I'm shut up all day working for a terrible old lady who gives me different orders every 5 seconds.
"I think washing cups and plates and keeping things tidy is the worst work in the world," said Beth. "My hands get too tired to play my music." "I have to go to school with girls who laugh at my dresses and say cruel things because my father isn't rich," said Amy. "I wish we had the money Father lost when we were little, Jo," said Meg.
"I wish I was a boy," said Jo. "Then I could go and fight beside Father."
Meg was 16 and very pretty, with large eyes and soft brown hair and white hands.
15-year-old Jo was very tall and thin. Her long, dark red hair was usually pushed up out of the way. Beth was 13, a very shy girl who seemed to live in a happy world of her own. Amy was the youngest, but thought herself to be the most important. She had blue eyes and yellow hair which curled onto her shoulders. At 6 o'clock, Beth put a pair of slippers by the fire to warm, and Meg lit the lamp. Amy got out of the comfortable chair without being asked, and Jo forgot how tired she was and held the slippers closer to the fire. "These are old," she said. "Mother needs a new pair."
"I'll get her some with my $1," said Beth. "No, I shall," cried Amy. "I'm the oldest," began Meg.
"I'm the man of the family now Father is away, and I shall buy them," said Jo.
"Let's each get her something and not get anything for ourselves," said Beth.
"That's a kind idea," said Jo. "What shall we get?"
Everyone thought for a moment. Then Meg said, "I'll give her a nice pair of gloves."
"The best army slippers," said Jo.
"Some handkerchiefs," said Beth. "A little bottle of perfume," said Amy. "It won't cost much, so I'll have some money left to buy something for me."
"We'll let Mother think we're getting things for ourselves, and then surprise her," said Jo. Mrs. March arrived home soon after. She took off her wet things and put on her warm slippers. Meg made the tea, Jo brought wood for the fire, Beth was quiet and busy, and Amy gave orders. "I've got a letter from Father," cried Mrs. March. It was a letter to cheer them up, and the special message for the girls came at the end. Give them all my love and a kiss. I think of them every day. I know they will be loving children to you, and that when I come back, I will be prouder than ever of my little women." A tear dropped off the end of Joe's nose. Amy hid her face on her mother's shoulder. "I'm selfish," she cried, "but I'll try to be better." "We all will," cried Meg. "I think too much about the way I look and hate to work, but I won't any more." "And I'll try to be a little woman," said Joe, "and not be rough and wild." Beth said nothing, but she began to work hard at a blue army glove she was making. So the 4 girls decided that they would all try very hard to be good. They would never be cross or lazy or selfish, and they would all help each other. They talked over their plan that evening while they made sheets for Aunt March. Then, at 9 o'clock, they stopped to sing a song. Beth played the old piano, and Meg and her mother led the singing. Joe always sang in the wrong place, but the girls never got too old to sing together. Chapter 2. A Happy Christmas. Joe was the first to wake up on Christmas morning, but soon they were all awake, and they went downstairs. "Where's Mother?" asked Meg. "I don't know," said old Hannah. She had lived with the family since Meg was born, and was more like a friend than a servant. "Some poor woman came to the door, and your mother went off to see what was needed." "She'll be back soon," said Meg. She looked at the presents for her mother, which were in a basket under a chair, ready to bring out at the right time. "Where is Amy's bottle of perfume?" "She went to put some pretty paper round it, I think," said Joe. Suddenly they heard the outside door close. "Here's Mother. Hide the basket, quick," said Joe. But it was Amy. She came in quickly. "Where have you been, and what's that behind you?" asked Meg. "I ran to the shop and changed the little bottle of perfume for a big one," said Amy. "I spent all my money to get it, and I'm not going to be selfish any more." Meg smiled proudly and put her arms around her sister. Then there was another bang from the outside door, and the basket was pushed back under the chair. The girls ran to the table, ready for their breakfast. "Happy Christmas, Mother!" they shouted. "Happy Christmas, little daughters," said Mrs. March. Then the smile disappeared from her face. "Girls, listen. Not far away is a poor woman, Mrs. Hummel, with a new baby. Her 6 children are in one bed trying to keep warm, as they have no wood for a fire. There is nothing to eat, and they are hungry and cold. Will you give them your breakfast as a Christmas present?" For a minute, no one spoke. Then Joe said, "Mother, I'm so glad you came back before we began to eat." And the girls quickly began to put their breakfast in a basket. "I knew you would do it," said Mrs. March, smiling. She took the girls and Hannah to a cold, miserable little room in an old building where they found a sick mother, a crying baby, and a group of children with white, frightened faces. The children were on the bed under a blanket, trying to keep warm. The woman almost cried with happiness when she saw the girls. Hannah, who had brought wood, made a fire. Mrs. March gave the mother tea and hot food. Then she dressed the little baby gently. The girls put the children round the fire and fed them like hungry birds. It was a very happy meal, although the girls ate none of it. But no one was happier than those hungry young ladies who gave away their breakfast on Christmas morning. Mrs. March was surprised and pleased when she saw her presents later. There was a lot of laughing and kissing and explaining. Then, for the rest of the day, the girls were busy. Joe liked to write plays, and the four of them were going to act one that evening. They had learned their words and had worked hard to make strange and wonderful clothes for all the different characters in the play. On Christmas night, some other girls came to watch. At first, there was a lot of whispering and laughing from the four sisters behind the curtains. Then the curtains were opened, and the play began. It was an exciting story about Hugo, acted by Joe, wearing a black beard, beautiful Zara, and brave Rodrigo. There were also 2 ghosts, a cruel king, and a tall castle made of paper and wood, which, unfortunately, fell down just as Rodrigo and Zara were escaping from it. There were screams of laughter from everyone, but the actors picked themselves up and carried on through more dangers and mysteries until the happy ending was reached. All the visitors loved the play, and after the excitement and fun came a surprise for everyone. "Would the young ladies like to stay for supper?" asked Hannah. And when the girls saw the supper table, they could not believe their eyes. There was ice cream, cake, fruit, and French chocolate, and in the middle of the table were flowers for each of the 4 actors. "Where did it all come from?" asked Amy. "From Father Christmas, perhaps," said Beth. "Mother did it," said Meg. "Aunt March sent it," said Joe. "You're all wrong," laughed Mrs. March. "Old Mr. Lawrence sent it." "The Lawrence boy's grandfather?" said Meg. "But we don't know him." "Hannah told his servant about your breakfast party, and that pleased him," said Mrs. March. "He knew my father many years ago, and he sent me a note this afternoon asking if he could send my children a few small Christmas presents." "The idea came from that boy. I know it did," said Joe. "I'm sure he wants to know us, but he's shy, and Meg won't let me speak to him when we pass him in the street. She says that it's not at all polite for young ladies to introduce themselves to strangers." "You mean the people who live in the big house next door, don't you?" said one of the other girls. "My mother knows old Mr. Lawrence. She says he keeps his grandson in the house when the boy isn't riding or walking with his tutor, and makes him study very hard. We invited the boy to our party, but he didn't come." "That boy needs to have some fun," said Joe.